All right, let's try this again. I'm going to see who's still around. I apologize for all of the hiccups tonight. It's incredibly frustrating. But let's see who's around. I'm going to touch base with you guys really quick. Do you want me to continue with this one, or do you want me to postpone it until it's at the exact right level of quality that you guys are always accustomed to? I'm going to poll the audience, see how this goes, because honestly, most of you might have gone to bed already. I don't know. I don't know how people deal with these. Okay. All right. Everyone's doing okay? You guys ready for this? Perfect. Let's go ahead. Let's just go for it. We're gonna endure through all the technological storms that can get thrown at us tonight. And if you guys are truly interested in this, I will take you still on a virtual tour. This is now competing for the most difficult tour that I've ever given. The top ranking one, though, was we did a walking tour for the city of Tacoma of East Tacoma, and it was the single greatest amount of rainfall that occurred that year in one day. It was such a torrential downpour that every single person in that audience was completely soaked, and they still soldiered through. We completed the entire walking tour all through that outdoor, like several blocks. So, all right, let's do this. I'm going to make sure that I can actually get these. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to basically bring this up as a folder, so you get to see all of the exciting things that I've compiled in a completely mismanaged way. But we have pictures of Tacoma's original Chinatown. So let's see if I can bring those up for you here. So this is one of the few photos that actually exists of the original Tacoma Chinatown. It was first established in the late 1870s, early 1880s, kind of as Tacoma was becoming the great city that it wanted to be, the boomiest of boom towns, as Mark Twain, or actually Rudyard Kipling, I think, said. And down on the waterfront where old Tacoma is, and the Hatch Mill was located, you can see these shacks lined up there in the front. And I think I've even got perhaps a crisper image of it for you. I'll bring that one up really quick. Here you go. So this gives you a sense of what Tacoma's Chinatown really looked like. And you can see that it was premium waterfront territory. Like, they were right down there, and they were right on top of the railroad. They were hugging the coast down there, and they would actually leave their homes, get on to the rail cars, and then ride them out to wherever their jobs were, because they were there to work. The majority of the Chinese population that immigrated to the United States came in like the 1850s, 1860s, and they were chasing the gold rush, the excitement of all the gold that was being mined in California, and they were being promised this glorious life back in China. And when they arrived to the United States, they were confronted with some pretty tragic truths about that dream. The taxation on them was disproportionately high, being Chinese nationals. The intense amount of racism that they encountered as soon as they hit the shores was quite steep. And so, sort of falling out of that failed dream down in California, the majority of the Chinese population was looking for a place to go work, and Tacoma became a really popular place to go because it was the terminus for the Great East-West Railroad. So as the railroad was connecting the country for the first time ever, East and West were becoming one. The Chinese workforce was the main workforce driving that rail line from the West Coast eastward. And no small portion of that was going through the Cascades and the Rockies. while the workforce that was constructing the railroad from the East Coast westward had to go through a whole bunch of traversing, building trestle bridges, going across the Great Plains. The majority of work over here was actually tunneling through the mountains. And that was, first and foremost, a Chinese job. When the Chinese got to Tacoma, they were instantly welcomed here to do the backbreaking labor of constructing the railroad across and then through the Cascades. And I've got one for you here on that one too. Let's see if I can bring it up for you here. So this is, I think, taken right outside what is the Stampede Pass tunnel. And you can see that there's quite a few of the Chinese workers here intermingled with the European immigrants as they were constructing that rail line across. And I've got a really good one in here of them completing that track as they went across. Here we go. So I'll bring this one up for you guys as well, just so that you can see, you know, a picture of what life was like in the West for the first Chinese force out here. And the majority of people coming to the area would have been men, and they were taking all of that money that they were making and sending it back home to their families. They were really hoping to make their fortune here, and then eventually not only provide for their families back home in China, but then bring them over so that they could live here together. And so that is how we got the establishment of Tacoma's Chinatown right down on the waterfront. So here's one of the sort of beginning days of early Tacoma. This is near the salmon cannery that would have been just on the border of Old Town in Tacoma. And I love this picture because it shows so much of early Tacoma, because you've got the European immigrants. There were some Chinese immigrants here. They were still commingling with the Puyallup and the Nisqually and creating what was going to become Tacoma in the area here. And that area that connects Old Town Tacoma to downtown Tacoma became Chinatown. So I got to show you guys earlier the map of that area, but I'm going to bring up for you guys sort of a look at the timeline as we're going through here. So let me bring this one up for you guys really quick. Now that I've got all these photos coming, I want to make sure that I'm giving you guys an opportunity to experience them one by one. So here we go. So 1873 kind of becomes the beginning of Tacoma's Chinatown. And again, it's really primarily this one picture that shows that area. There was such poor documentation of the Chinatown district because it wasn't really seen as an important part to the Tacoma narrative, which is too bad because it was such a vital part to Tacoma's story. All of the fame, the fortune, and the money that was rolling into the city really owes itself to the railroad and becoming the terminus for the railroad, the major stop. More than Seattle, more than Olympia, this was the spot where all of that east-west rail line was going to end up stopping and then branching out from here. And that wouldn't have happened without the construction of Stampede Pass Tunnel, the rail line over and through the Cascades, or the Chinese workforce that constructed the majority of it down there. But by the time that was really built and everything was established, two things happened. One, suddenly there were a lot of jobs that disappeared from Tacoma. And two, the great financial collapse of 1873 really threw everything for a loop. And suddenly there were even less jobs in the area, and there welled up this huge amount of anti-Chinese sentiment and people who really blamed the Chinese for essentially working for less and for just being here in general. And they were an easy scapegoat because they clearly looked different in the way that they dressed, ate, and just overall physical appearance. They were easy to pick out as a group. And because so many of them lived in their own section of town, it became a very easy target for the people in Tacoma to sort of blame all of the problems on. And this is where things start to get ugly for Tacoma's Chinatown. So I want to give you guys an aerial view really quick of what the area looks like now, because you really get to see in a lot of ways how the area has changed and also how it has not changed. So let's fly across here really quick. So this area that you're looking at right now is still part of the functional railroad through the area here. That is the main rail line through Tacoma, and where those tracks are would have been the majority of Tacoma's Chinatown, extending out here to where the grain silos are today. That would have been sort of the main hub and kind of the area where the hatch mill was. And so as you're flying down here, we would have been right over the main heart of Chinatown, in that grassy, forested area that extends up towards the top of the screen, goes into the main heart of downtown Tacoma. When you were first looking at it, you would have been looking up towards Old City Hall and the North Pacific Railroad building right there on the top of the hill. And that was, from 1893 onwards, the main heart of the economy and industry in downtown Tacoma. But at the time, it was a collection of businesses and rail offices sort of fighting to become the it city on the West Coast. And so they were right perched above Tacoma's Chinatown. And the anti-Chinese sentiment you can see, sadly, way more visibly than you could Chinatown itself. There was a lot more photographs of it. This is from an ad that was getting shared around quite a bit at the time, which I think encapsulates everything that was happening. As the Chinese got more and more scapegoated in the area, you would see more and more of these advertisements or posters being passed around. The whole thing boiled to this crux in 1873, when the mayor of Tacoma, who I have a picture of for you guys right here, Mayor Jacob Weissbach, he himself a German immigrant who recently moved to the United States, set up shop here in Tacoma, was elected the mayor, and then decided that he was going to bring it upon himself to spearhead the movement to oust the Chinese. Really started to whip up even more anger and vitriol in the area. And he was going back and forth. He was going down to Olympia. He was going up to Seattle. And he was really launching these campaigns to get people to try and get rid of the Chinese. And around the same time, the Chinese massacre happened down in California. And Jacob Weissbach here decided that they could do something cleaner and more efficient. So they decided that what they were going to do was to elect a commission of 15 people to inspect the Chinatown area, to decide whether or not it was something that should be kept in the area, which quickly turned into the Committee of 15 being brought down to remove the Chinese from the area. So Tacoma's 27 was the first committee, and then it eventually got boiled down to 15 people who were responsible for enforcing the entire thing. And the Tacoma 27, led by that mayor, Weissbach here in Tacoma, made the decision that on November 3rd, 1885, they would go down to Tacoma's Chinatown with a bell in hand and then round up everyone down there and force them out. And they managed to do that with the overwhelming support of people in Tacoma, to the point where on that morning of November 3rd in 1885, they actually brought, the estimation is 1,000 townspeople from Tacoma, all of them armed with either clubs or guns. They went down to Chinatown first thing in the morning, and that anyone who was down there on the streets, they moved at gunpoint out of the area. If anyone was inside their home, they would kick in the door, remove them from the house, and then force them on a march down the railroad tracks. To the point where all 200 plus people who were living in the Chinatown there in Tacoma at the time were forcefully evicted under threat of death, moved to a train station just south of Tacoma, and then forced to wait there until a train came to pick them up. And the passenger train at the time, when it first arrived, I think at 3:30 in the morning, after all of this had happened, only had enough room for so many of them. And so the wealthiest members of them bought tickets on that train and then left. And the next train that came through the area was actually a freight train. And the engineer on the freight train was like, yeah, just put them on the train. I'll take them out of here. And depending on how you read that in the context of it, thank you for the clarification here. Depending on how you read that on the context of it, it was either sort of a merciful decision on the engineer's job, or it was like, I'm happy to get these people out of here. Thank you, Dusty, for the clarification on this. So this is an important part of the story as well. The Council of 15, the people who launched this campaign to remove the Chinese out of the area, do so very efficiently. And then afterwards, they're shocked when the national attention shows up on them and it's not positive like they thought it would be. They really felt that they were doing the right thing here, and that they were doing it in a clean fashion, because they didn't go through and just murder everyone. They were just doing general beatings and forceful evictions. What really puts the nail in the coffin is that a few people were sent down to, quote, inspect the buildings, end quote, afterwards, and that there was a suspicious fire that started in the area there. When you look at all the historic documents at the time, it wasn't just a suspicious fire. It was very clearly an arson, and it's corroborated by the fact that the closest fire departments in the area had their hoses slashed the night before. So Chinatown burns to the ground and is completely erased off the map and out of the history books from Tacoma. And that begins this long period of anti-Chinese immigration laws, anti-Chinese housing laws, and this push to make sure that no one of Chinese descent enters back into Tacoma, to the point where anyone who hired Chinese labor force would be threatened by these people with violence. And that happened both before the eviction and after. And it was such a huge thing at the time that it ends up being called the Tacoma Method. And it is something that is referenced again and again throughout history. Olympia ends up trying to do it. Seattle does successfully do it, and to the point where they actually employed more violence, and the National Guard was brought in to enforce peace in the city of Seattle. And eventually the Chinese population rebounded there, but it didn't ever in Tacoma, because the sentiment was so strongly against the Chinese ever returning that it just didn't happen. So when you look at Tacoma today and you are shocked by the lack of a Chinatown and that large open space, this was the impetus of the whole thing that happened. Now, it isn't to say that it was a universal opinion. There were some dissenting voices at the time, not the least of which was Ezra Meeker. You may be familiar with him. He was the hop king of the Pacific Northwest. He lived in the Puyallup area, but he was an active resident throughout all of the South Sound. And he was responsible for really rallying against this whole movement. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it on his end. While we're talking about people who were really trying to combat the entire thing, I think it's important to mention the law enforcement response to this whole experience. And if I can find my picture of the guy here, I'll bring him up for you guys really quick. So this gentleman right here, this was the U.S. Marshal who was responsible for responding to this incident. This is U.S. Marshal Colonel Albert White, W-H-Y-T-E. And he was the law officer who was responsible for rounding up and arresting the Council of 27, the people that we showed you the picture of earlier there. And they were all arrested. Their trial was taken down to Vancouver, where they were kept for a period of time. And then eventually the trial was moved back up to Tacoma, where absolutely everyone that they were involved in, every jury member, universally acquit them. So they never faced any charges, repercussions, or anything for their actions. And Tacoma was very insulated in that experience because there were repercussions for the majority of people who had anything to do with other Chinese expulsions or massacres. But for Tacoma, it was a celebrated incident. When those guys returned back to Tacoma, they were, for the majority of people in Tacoma, seen as heroes, though not everyone. And it ended up being a huge stigma for Tacoma later on, to the point where eventually, after the year 2000, the reconciliation process started to begin. So a lot of you might be familiar. I'm going to bring it up for you guys here because we've got some more footage of it. But down on the waterfront, sort of in between Old Town and that gap where Chinatown used to be, is Chinese Reconciliation Park. And I'll bring it up for you guys here so we can take a look at it really quick. Chinese Reconciliation Park, as the name implies, was a multi-person effort. This was a joint effort between the deputy mayor, city council members, the city of Tacoma members, Port of Tacoma, the World Trade Center, and then also members of the Chinese government and our Tacoma Chinese sister city. And everyone got together, and the actions that were taken against the Chinese all that time ago were denounced as entirely wrong. And the hope for making reparations and achieving reconciliation began. And thus the park was started in 2010. And so it tells the story, like right here, this is the beginning of all those Chinese nationals coming over to America in search of gold and a better life for them and their families. And then as you move across to the park here, it tells the story of that expulsion and then the exclusion of the Chinese from the area. Again, led by the mayor, city council members, the fire chief, the most prominent members of Tacoma were the tip of the spear, rounding up the Chinese and removing the entirety of their population from Tacoma, ensuring that they couldn't return, and then burning not only their homes, but all of their possessions. It was whatever you could grab before you were forcefully evicted from the city. And a lot of that story is told here as you march through these stones. Now, the artist that is primarily responsible for Chinese Reconciliation Park also has a lot of poignant thoughts on just the tilted scale of the Chinese workforce in the area. And I'm going to bring up a couple of these for you really quick, because I think they do such a fantastic job of telling that story. So I think one of the most famous photos of this time period is right here. So this is obviously Champagne Square. This is by a photographer whose name was Andre Russell. And it's unofficially called the Champagne photo. The official title is East and West Shaking Hands at the meeting up of the last rail, I think, or lane of the last rail. I don't remember exactly. But what you're seeing is the East and West rail lines meeting finally in the middle and finally joining joyously, jubilantly, the East and West Coast, creating a unified nation of peace and strength. And as you might tell from this photo, there's a huge part of the workforce that is not at all represented here. And for some more look at that, the artist who helped design Chinese Reconciliation Park, Ji Lin, created two pieces of art here that I think are particularly impactful. This one right here he created, which was supposed to be an immersive experience. This is projected on a wall and has a full soundscape that's designed to go with it here. But obviously it is the backside of that first photo that I showed you there. The one that is his more prominent work, though, here, I'm going to bring up for you guys really quick. This is the Chinese view of the Golden Spike ceremony in Utah. And as you can see, it's representative of the fact that they were left far behind despite all of the work that had been put into that project. And to see so much of the infrastructure, industry, success, and development of the nation, and that arterial lifeline that fed in Tacoma be constructed by the Chinese workforce, and then to have them removed in every way from the narrative, from the city, from the photographs, everything is truly heartbreaking. And it was very much a Tacoma thing. Like I said, Seattle had a similar approach to it that ended up getting pushed down by federal intervention. And in fact, Olympia's is one of my favorite stories because it was a single law enforcement officer, the sheriff at the time, Sheriff William Billings, I believe his name was, Williamson Billings, stood up to the entire crowd in Olympia and was essentially like, absolutely not. This is not how we do things in Olympia, and saved Olympia's Chinatown. Unfortunately, several years later, due to an unrelated mob, it was just a freak occurrence of a fire, and the entire Chinatown burned down there. But that section is still in memoriam there. And a large portion of that Chinese immigrant population remained in Olympia. In fact, that's the Locke, I guess, group. So many of the Chinese nationals that moved to Olympia just took the surname Locke because it was the area in China that they were from. And through that line is how we end up with Governor Gary Locke, the first Asian American governor in the United States, right here in Washington State. So you can kind of get some context on that. I want to show you guys another one here. I've got an aerial view of the area down there at Chinese Reconciliation Park, which I think gives you a really good look of the pagoda down there, which is the part that I'm most excited to show you guys here in a second. So the pagoda down there was the final installation, or the most recent installation, not the final part of the whole thing. That was a joint work that was actually created by artists in China, disassembled, and then moved to Chinese Reconciliation Park, and then reassembled under their supervision here, piece by piece. And again, it's part of our sister city back in China. And so I love that you get this view of the area, and you can see each individual piece down here. And one of the most exciting parts is that this is very much an interactive park here. They're doing more than just trying to achieve reconciliation for the deeds of the past, but they're really trying to create not a new Chinatown, but to help bring a lot of that information, customs, and traditions back into the area. So if you check out their site, Tacoma Chinese Reconciliation, I think we'll share the link here in a second. They do a lot of Chinese festivals or cultural interpretation moments, and really try to engage the community in helping them to understand not just the past, but also the future, and to sort of merge the two storylines so that we can become a stronger city. So it is not a new Chinatown, but it is a new beginning. And it is a good juxtaposition to the whole thing. I want to give you guys another photo here that sort of looks, because we had some really good ones here. I'm going to put all of the extra photos and everything that I had prepped for tonight up online so that you guys can see it. I did want to address a couple of the saucier rumors in the area about the Chinatown. You might be familiar with this photo. I know this one drifts around and around the internet and becomes the the like end all be all of the Chinese tunnels. So this picture, I believe, is from 1924. I'll double check on that. But was originally published in the Tacoma Daily Ledger and was about one of the Chinese tunnels in the area. And the belief was that this tunnel was used by the Chinese to escape Tacoma. There's really nothing to verify that. Only one person has ever been documented as having been inside of it. By the time this picture was taken in the mid-1920s, it had been partially used as a sewer by the citizens out in the Furcrest area. And so you couldn't actually access any part of it to really chart the depths of this particular tunnel. The official story that was published in the Ledger is that this opened up at a opening on the upper side of Salmon Beach area on the very far side of Tacoma, and that it ran approximately 2.5 miles long. Now, I can't confirm or deny any part of that. I can say that if you look at the records of the area, it's very unlikely that this was used as a tunnel for escape. Most of the Chinese were out within 48 hours and actually had to march along the railroad track to escape the violence in the area here. There is a high likelihood, ironically, that this tunnel or similar ones throughout the city of Tacoma, primarily just short hatches or underground passageways in the city of Tacoma, were actually used to bring the Chinese back into Tacoma. After the Great Chinese Expulsion, there was actually a huge push underground to bring a lot of Chinese workforce back into the city of Tacoma. And while it was illegal and you could be threatened with violence, it was a very affordable way to get a lot of stuff done. So a lot of people did smuggle Chinese people back into the city, and with them a great deal of opium. And that happened in the section where Tacoma's Chinatown would have originally been located, down there by the Foss Waterway Seaport, as it is today. That building was once the world's longest grain warehouse, and it had a secret hatch in part of it where people would bring in contraband. And for a period in the 1920s and 30s, it was used to smuggle in quite a bit of illicit substances into the area, and no shortage of which was probably an illegal Chinese workforce down there. The fact that that all occurred right on that site where the original Chinatown is not something that is easily missed. I think the last thing I'll kind of say about this whole thing is that when you're looking at the history of Tacoma's Chinatown, and since we can't experience the Chinatown because it doesn't exist, we have to sort of look at the outline, the shadow of what's missing to sort of conjure the image in our head. It's particularly poignant to think about the fact that it was so incredibly sad to watch the Chinese be forcefully evicted out on the railroad, which was the very labor that they had worked so hard to create. That this iron doorway into Tacoma that they had built themselves became their firm exit from the city, really forever. And while the reconciliation process has begun in early 2000, you look at the over 100-year history of the city of Tacoma and the fact that there's still only approximately 700 or less Chinese nationals in the area is a testament to the fact that that stain sticks with Tacoma even now. And so my personal hope as a guide is that we all learn our stories so that we can continue to do better moving forward in the future. So looking out on the horizon of Tacoma at the great skyscape of Tacoma's Chinatown that no longer exists should give us pause at what else we can be doing better. So I'll take a couple questions here really quick. Yes, where did the Chinese go when they left Tacoma? That's a very good question. They continued south. Some of them found respite or safety in the Lakewood area, Olympia, Vancouver, Portland, anywhere that they could go. And some of them had to just continue on south down into California again. But there was a pretty big dispersal because the anti-Chinese sentiment was strong throughout not just the West Coast, but the country at the time. And a lot of the photos that we'll share later are of the anti-Chinese legislation that was being passed at the congressional level back in Washington, D.C., and just this huge push to expel the Chinese from the country. And a lot of the anti-immigration laws that the country had to deal with for a long period of time originated at this time period and were pushed forward by the Tacoma Method. If anybody has enjoyed this heartbreaking experience through history tonight and you'd like to show your appreciation, tips are always appreciated. We still have our link. It's a PayPal link right on the homepage of prettygrittytours.com. We'll share the link in the comments here below. But if you guys have any extra questions, comments, please let me know. The greatest part of these tours for me is the community that has arisen from them, and having the opportunity to interact with such a far-reaching group of people who are passionate about discovery, exploration, history, and just learning the stories in the area. So if you guys have anything that you'd like to let me know or any recommendations for future tours, this Saturday, we're going to have the tech dialed in. My guarantee. We are going to be doing the virtual tour of Stampede Pass, which is the tunnel that was constructed. This is not a coincidence that we are doing this, but Stampede Pass tunnel drove through the Cascade Mountains. It was one of the most dangerous parts of the Great East-West Railroad and is a functional rail tunnel today. So we'll be talking about that. And then we have a whole list of new tours coming up, but we're always taking recommendations. So if you guys have anything, please let me know. And again, thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you guys soon. Keep on exploring.